Don't you dare. You're not going to deny me this opportunity, I said, my voice rising as I stood in Richard Wilson's office doorway. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I forced myself to stand tall. The department head looked up from his desk with a satisfied grin that made my stomach turn. After a decade of dedicated service to Peterson Consulting, this was how it would end, with that smug smile I'd seen too many times before. My name is Elaine Bennett, and at 52, I've spent the last 10 years of my career at one of San Francisco's leading corporate consulting firms. Through 3 company restructures, 2 economic downturns, and countless late nights perfecting client presentations, I had proven myself invaluable, or so I thought. The photo of my late husband Robert on my desk had witnessed it all, his encouraging smile reminding me daily of our shared dream for my career success. Elaine, please sit down, Richard motioned to the chair across from his desk, his voice carrying that rehearsed sympathy that HR must teach in management training. We're bringing in someone younger for your role. After 10 years, it's time to move on. The words hung in the air between us, someone younger, not someone more qualified or experienced, just younger. I felt the familiar heat of indignation rising in my chest as I thought of Robert's words when I'd faced challenges before, never let them see you break, Ellie. I took a deep breath instead of letting my emotions show. This wasn't the time for an emotional outburst. I nodded calmly, though inside I was screaming. I appreciate the notice, Richard. My muted response clearly wasn't what he expected. Richard blinked momentarily, thrown off script. He ran his hand through his carefully styled hair, a gesture I'd seen whenever he felt uncertain. Well, good. I'm glad you understand. The transition will take place over the next month. We'll need you to train your replacement, Olivia. She graduates from Berkeley next week. I smiled thinly, thinking about our mortgage that was finally paid off last year after Robert's medical bills had nearly bankrupted me. Of course. What Richard didn't know, what nobody in the department knew, was that the next board meeting would be special, very special indeed. Will there be a formal announcement? I asked, my voice steady. We'll announce it at the department meeting on Monday, Richard replied, already turning his attention back to his computer screen, dismissing me. HR will be in touch about your severance package. I stood up and smoothed my blazer, thinking about my 2 children who had finally finished college after years of juggling tuition payments and work responsibilities. I see. And the quarterly board meeting is still next Thursday at 2 p.m.? Richard looked up, confusion flickering across his face. Yes, but that's not something you need to concern yourself with anymore. Just double-checking my calendar, I said lightly. Will CEO Davis be in attendance? Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. Why do you ask? Just curious, I replied with a shrug. Well, I won't take up any more of your time. As I walked out of his office, I felt strangely calm. 10 years at Peterson Consulting had taught me patience, resilience, and the importance of knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. The next board meeting would reveal everything, and Richard Wilson's smug satisfaction would evaporate faster than morning fog on the bay. Some secrets were worth keeping, even when you were being shown the door. Walking back to desk, as I walked back to my desk, I couldn't help but smile at the irony of it all. 10 years of dedication reduced to a casual dismissal in a 15-minute meeting, yet here I was, holding on to information that would completely flip the script. My fingers brushed against the small jade plant on my desk, a gift from Robert on my first day at Peterson. For growth and perseverance, he had said. How right he had been. Everything okay? Asked Marcus Chen from the adjacent cubicle. His eyes held genuine concern. He'd seen too many people walk that same path from Richard's office, faces drawn with shock and disappointment. Marcus had been at Peterson even longer than I had, 15 years of loyal service, with a photo of his 3 children prominently displayed on his desk. Never better, I replied, voice low enough to avoid attracting attention. My hand automatically went to the wedding band I still wore on a chain around my neck. Just the usual Friday drama. I hadn't told anyone about the private meeting with CEO Catherine Davis 3 weeks ago. It had been unexpected, a call directly to my personal cell on a Sunday afternoon while I was tending to my rooftop garden, the hobby that had helped me maintain my sanity after Robert's passing. "Elaine, we need to talk about your future at Peterson," Catherine had said, her normally formal tone relaxed and direct. "Not at the office. Can you meet me at Bayview Cafe tomorrow at 7 a.m.? The memory of that morning was still vivid. Catherine had arrived early, securing a private corner table with a stunning view of the Golden Gate Bridge shrouded in morning mist. I remember thinking how the fog mirrored the uncertainty in my own life, sometimes obscuring the path ahead, but always eventually lifting. "I'll get straight to the point," she'd said after we exchanged pleasantries. "The board is restructuring our leadership approach. We've been watching your work on the West Lake project. Your innovative solutions saved us millions and impressed our biggest clients." I'd been preparing for bad news, not praise. My hands had tightened around my coffee mug as I thought of Robert's favorite saying, "Expect nothing, appreciate everything." "Thank you," I'd managed to say, feeling oddly vulnerable. "But we want you on the executive board, Elaine," Catherine had continued, as our new chief operations officer. "You understand both the technical and human elements of our business in a way nobody else does. You've demonstrated not just professional excellence, but true emotional intelligence in managing teams across generational divides." The offer had been unexpected and overwhelming, a seat on the board overseeing all operational aspects of Peterson Consulting, including Richard's department. "Why me?" I asked, still processing the magnitude of the opportunity. "Because you see what others miss," Catherine had replied simply, "and because it's time we had someone at the table who remembers what it's like to be in the trenches. Someone who understands that our people are more than just resources, they're individuals with lives, families, and unique contributions." The secrecy had been Catherine's idea. "The board vote is just a formality, but I need to manage the politics carefully. Some members, particularly those with connections to Richard, might try to interfere if they knew beforehand. So, I'd signed the contract with only Catherine and the company's legal counsel present. For 3 weeks, I'd attended early morning strategy sessions disguised as vendor meetings in my calendar. I'd reviewed confidential reports and helped draft a new operational framework after hours, all while Richard plotted my removal. Back at my desk, I checked my phone. A message from Catherine, "Contracts filed, announcement prepared, still on for Thursday." I texted back a single thumbs-up emoji, feeling a flutter of anticipation in my chest. For the rest of the afternoon, I diligently worked on transition notes for my supposed replacement. Richard passed by twice, looking pleased with himself each time. Let him enjoy this moment of perceived victory, I thought, remembering how Robert always said patience was the most underrated virtue. The real revelation was just days away. The weekend dragged on endlessly as I prepared for what would undoubtedly be the most consequential week of my career. I spent Saturday morning in my rooftop garden, the familiar routine of pruning and watering bringing a sense of calm to my racing thoughts. The plants had been Robert's idea when we first moved into the apartment, a little piece of nature in the concrete jungle, he'd called it. Now, 3 years after his passing, it had become my sanctuary. "What would you think about all this, Rob?" I asked aloud, touching the small memorial stone nestled among the plants. The morning sunlight caught on my wedding ring, still hanging from a chain around my neck. No answer came except the gentle breeze that rustled the leaves, but I could almost hear his laugh, see his proud smile. I spent Sunday organizing my closet, carefully selecting outfits for the upcoming week. For Monday's department meeting, I chose a professional but understated ensemble, nothing that would signal the impending change in my status. For Thursday's board meeting, however, I selected my power outfit, a tailored charcoal suit I'd purchased after Catherine's offer, accented with a subtle jade silk blouse that brought out the green in my eyes. Robert had always said green was my color, that it made me look both strong and compassionate. That evening, I video called my daughter Melissa in Chicago, careful not to reveal anything about the upcoming changes. "Mom, you seem distracted," she said, her eyes, so like her father's, narrowing with concern. "Is work okay?" I forced a smile. "Just busy." "How's medical school treating you?" Brutal as expected, she laughed. "Dad would be so proud of both of us right now, you know. Me following his footsteps into medicine, and you still climbing that corporate ladder he always knew you could conquer." "I think of him every day at work," I admitted, my voice softening. "Sometimes I still expect to get his text messages during my lunch break." "Me too, Mom." "Me too." After we hung up, I sent a quick text to my son James in Boston, getting a characteristic brief but loving response. My children were my greatest accomplishment, the one thing Richard Wilson with his 2 failed marriages would never understand. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office early, dressed in the professional attire I'd worn for years. The department meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference room. I took my usual seat near the middle of the table, not too prominent, not too hidden. As colleagues filtered in, the room buzzed with the usual Monday morning energy, conversations about weekend activities, project deadlines, and industry gossip. My hand unconsciously went to my necklace, finding comfort in the familiar shape of the ring. It was a habit I'd developed after Robert's death, a small gesture that helped me feel his presence during difficult moments. Richard entered last, followed by a young woman I'd never seen before. She couldn't have been older than 23, with a nervous smile and wide eyes that took in the room with undisguised excitement. I noticed a small locket around her neck, perhaps a gift from someone special, much like my ring. "Good morning, everyone," Richard announced, clapping his hands together. "Before we dive into project updates, I have an important announcement." The room quieted immediately. Several of my colleagues glanced in my direction, sensing what was coming. "I'd like to introduce Olivia Parker, who will be joining our team as Senior Project Manager. Over the next month, she'll be working closely with Elaine, who will be leaving us to pursue other opportunities." There it was, the corporate euphemism for being pushed out. I kept my expression neutral as curious and sympathetic looks turned my way. Marcus caught my eye from across the table, his brow furrowed with concern and something else, anger on my behalf, perhaps. "Elaine has been with us for 10 years, Richard continued, his tone suggesting he was bestowing a great honor upon me by acknowledging my service, and we appreciate her contributions. Please make Olivia feel welcome as she transitions into this important role." Olivia gave a small wave. "I'm really excited to join the team. I've heard so many great things about Peterson Consulting." As the meeting progressed through project updates and quarterly targets, I noticed Richard watching me carefully, perhaps expecting an outburst or sign of distress. Instead, I participated normally, offering insights on my current projects and volunteering to help with a challenging client issue. I even managed to smile genuinely when highlighting the success of our last campaign, a project that had kept me working late for weeks, often missing dinner with friends who had tried to pull me out of my grief after Robert died. After the meeting, Olivia approached me tentatively. "Ms. Bennett, Richard said you'd be showing me the ropes this week." Of course, I replied, gesturing for her to follow me to my workspace, and please, call me Elaine. Up close, I could see the dark circles under her eyes that she'd tried to conceal with makeup. As we walked, I felt a pang of sympathy for Olivia. She was merely a pawn in Richard's game, unaware of the complicated dynamic she'd stepped into. First thing you should know, I said once we reached my desk, is that consulting at Peterson is as much about politics as it is about technical skill. Olivia looked surprised by my frankness. I thought it would be more merit-based. I smiled. It should be. Maybe someday it will be again. I paused, noticing how she quickly checked her phone. Everything okay? Olivia hesitated before answering. My son's daycare. They sometimes call with issues. You have a child? I asked, genuine interest replacing professional courtesy. A 2-year-old, she admitted, looking slightly defensive as if expecting judgment. I finished my degree while raising him alone. I thought of my own struggles as a working mother, though I'd had Robert's support. That's incredibly impressive, Olivia. If you ever need flexibility for your son, come to me first before going to Richard. I know some workarounds in the system. Her eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. Thank you. That's really kind. We women have to stick together in this business, I said simply, feeling a new resolve about the changes I would make as COO. The next 3 days passed in a blur of knowledge transfer sessions, project handoffs, and careful documentation of my workflow. Through it all, I maintained my professional demeanor, giving Olivia every advantage I could without revealing my true circumstances. I found myself genuinely liking the young woman. Her determination to succeed as a single mother reminded me of my own struggles when Robert had been battling his illness and I'd had to balance hospital visits with work deadlines. How do you handle everything? I asked her during lunch on Wednesday, genuinely curious about her juggling act. One day at a time, she replied with a tired smile. My mother helps when she can, but she works 2 jobs herself. Some days I feel like I'm failing at everything, being a mom, being professional. She trailed off, embarrassment crossing her face. Sorry, that's probably too personal. Not at all, I said, thinking of those early years with Melissa and James. I raised 2 kids while working full-time. My husband was a great partner, but there were still days when everything felt impossible. I hesitated, then added, he passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. Olivia's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I'm so sorry. Life throws curveballs at all of us, I said. The trick is learning to swing anyway. On Wednesday afternoon, Catherine called a company-wide meeting for Friday morning, the day after the board meeting. The email mentioned exciting organizational changes and new leadership announcements. My heart skipped a beat when I read it, the reality of what was coming finally hitting home. Richard read the message with a frown, clearly not privy to whatever Catherine had planned. He stopped by my desk later, his casual demeanor barely masking his curiosity. Do you know what this is about? He asked, nodding toward his computer screen. No idea, I lied smoothly, adjusting the jade plant on my desk. Perhaps they finally found someone to fill that VP position that's been vacant. He nodded, satisfied with my ignorance, and walked away. That evening, I called both my children to share the news that I couldn't yet tell anyone at work. They were ecstatic, Melissa even threatening to fly home for the weekend to celebrate. Dad would be over the moon, James said, his voice thick with emotion despite being normally reserved. Remember how he always said you were the smartest person in that company? He was biased, I laughed, though tears pricked at my eyes. He was right, James insisted. Mom, I'm so proud of you. Those words carried me through my final preparations for Thursday, the day everything would change. Thursday morning. Thursday morning arrived with a strange sense of calm washing over me. I'd prepared for this day meticulously, choosing my outfit with particular care. The tailored charcoal suit I'd purchased for the occasion, accented with the jade silk blouse that brought out the green in my eyes. As I fastened my husband's wedding ring on its chain around my neck, I whispered, "Today's for us, Rob." I arrived at work to find my going-away party in full swing, a sad spread of supermarket cupcakes and lukewarm coffee in the break room. My colleagues had signed a card with generic well wishes and memories of projects we'd tackled together. I accepted their condolences with grace, playing my part in this corporate theater while my stomach fluttered with anticipation. "We'll miss you around here," said Marcus, giving me an awkward side hug. His eyes held a knowing glint, as if he'd somehow sensed there was more to my calm acceptance than met the eye. "It won't be the same without your problem-solving magic." "Thank you," I replied, meaning it. Many of these people were genuine colleagues who had no part in Richard's machinations. "I'll miss this team, too." Richard stood at the edge of the gathering, checking his watch frequently. The board meeting was at 2 p.m., and as department head, he'd need to prepare his quarterly presentation. I knew exactly what was in it. I'd helped design the reporting framework years ago. "Elaine, could I see you in my office when you're done here?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before walking away, his designer shoes clicking on the polished floor. 15 minutes later, I sat across from him, watching as he shuffled papers on his desk. The photo of his much younger girlfriend smiled vacantly from a silver frame, the only personal touch in his meticulously organized office. "I wanted to thank you for handling this transition so professionally," he said without looking up. "It's refreshing, considering your tenure with the company." The slight emphasis on tenure made it clear what he really meant: my age. It seemed the appropriate response. I replied evenly, thinking of Robert's advice about taking the high road even when others didn't deserve it. Richard finally met my eyes. "Your severance package is generous, 2 months' salary plus your unused vacation time. The paperwork will be ready for your signature tomorrow." "I appreciate that." I fingered the jade pendant at my neck, thinking of how this money would help fund the trip to Europe I'd promised Robert we'd take someday. He leaned back in his chair, curiosity finally getting the better of him. "I have to ask, you've been surprisingly calm about all this. Did you see it coming?" I allowed myself a small, enigmatic smile. "Let's just say I've learned to prepare for all contingencies in my time here." Richard's expression hardened slightly. "Well, company needs evolve. Fresh perspectives become necessary. I'm sure you understand completely." I agreed. Change is inevitable in any organization. Sometimes it comes from unexpected directions. His eyes narrowed at my cryptic response, but before he could press further, his phone buzzed with a reminder. "I need to prepare for the board meeting." "Of course," I said, standing to leave. My heart was beating faster now, the moment of truth approaching. "Good luck with your presentation." I've always found the board to be quite attentive to details. As I walked out, I could feel his eyes on my back, a new uncertainty in his gaze. My calm acceptance had planted a seed of doubt, exactly as I'd intended. Back at my desk, I fielded a text from Catherine, conference room A130. "Come through the executive in trance." "On my way soon," I replied, my fingers trembling slightly with anticipation. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously organizing my desk, backing up personal files, and creating detailed instructions for Olivia. To anyone watching, I was simply being thorough before my departure. The executive entrance, at 1:15, I picked up my leather portfolio and headed toward the restroom, a perfectly normal afternoon activity that wouldn't raise suspicions. Once out of sight from the main office area, I changed course, taking the elevator to the top floor, where senior executives had their offices. My heart pounded against my ribs as the elevator climbed. I thought of Robert and how he'd encouraged me to apply for this job at Peterson 10 years ago, despite my doubts about starting over at a new company in my 40s. "You'll be running the place someday, Ellie," he had said with complete confidence. If only he could see me now. The executive suite had its own private entrance to the boardroom, a door that I had never had cause to use in my 10 years with the company, until today. Catherine was waiting for me in the hallway, her normally serious face softened with anticipation. She wore a navy suit that conveyed authority without trying too hard, something I'd always admired about her style. "Ready to make history?" she asked quietly, giving my arm a gentle squeeze. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, unconsciously touching my husband's ring for courage. Catherine noticed the gesture and smiled. "He would be proud, Elaine." I blinked back unexpected tears. "Thank you for seeing what others missed." "Perfect," she replied, checking her watch. "The other board members are already seated. Richard will enter through the main door at exactly 2 p.m. Let's make sure we're in position before then." Together, we walked toward the executive entrance to Conference Room A, where everything was about to change. I felt a strange mix of emotions: vindication, anticipation, but also a touch of sadness for what might have been if Richard had been able to see beyond his biases. The boardroom of Peterson Consulting exuded power and tradition. 12 high-backed leather chairs surrounded an immense mahogany table that had witnessed decades of critical decisions. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of San Francisco's skyline, a constant reminder of the heights to which the company had climbed. By 1:45 p.m., 10 board members were already seated, engaged in pre-meeting small talk. Catherine nodded subtly toward an empty chair on her right, my designated seat. I felt a momentary flutter of nerves as I took my place, but it quickly subsided as several board members smiled in recognition. William Harrison, the 70-year-old chairman of the board, extended his hand. His eyes crinkled warmly, reminding me a little of my own father. "Ms. Bennett, we're delighted to finally have you join us officially. Catherine has spoken highly of your operational insights." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." "I appreciate the opportunity," I replied, my voice steady despite the significance of the moment. I thought of all the late nights at my kitchen table after Robert's death, when work had been my only solace, the only thing that made sense when everything else was falling apart. For the next 10 minutes, I was introduced to each board member. Most knew me by reputation or from previous project presentations, but this interaction was different. I was now their peer, not a subordinate reporting up the chain. I made a mental note of each face, each handshake, storing away impressions for future reference. At precisely 2 p.m., the main door opened. Richard entered, carrying his presentation materials and looking confident. He greeted several board members by name as he made his way around the table, placing copies of his report at each seat. Then his eyes landed on me. The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable: confusion, followed by disbelief, then rapidly shifting to alarm. "Elaine, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice pitched slightly higher than normal. His perfectly styled hair seemed suddenly at odds with his flustered demeanor. Before I could respond, Catherine stood, commanding the room's attention. "Let's begin," she announced, gesturing for everyone to take their seats. "Before we move to department reports, I have an important announcement." Richard remained standing, his gaze darting between Catherine and me, clearly trying to piece together what was happening. The expensive leather portfolio in his hands now seemed to be a shield he was clutching rather than a professional accessory. "Please, take a seat, Richard," Catherine directed, waiting until he complied before continuing. As you all know, Peterson Consulting has been undergoing strategic restructuring to better position ourselves for the challenges ahead. After extensive evaluation, the executive committee and I have identified critical operational improvements needed across all departments. Richard fidgeted with his pen, no longer looking at me. A droplet of sweat had formed at his temple, threatening to make a journey down his face. To lead this effort, Catherine continued, we required someone with deep institutional knowledge, proven technical expertise, and the ability to bridge divisions within our organization. I'm pleased to announce that Elaine Bennett has accepted the position of Chief Operations Officer, effective immediately. A round of applause filled the room. Several board members nodded approvingly in my direction. I sat straight, accepting their acknowledgement with a dignified smile, while inside my heart soared. Robert had been right all along. As COO, Elaine will oversee all operational aspects of the company, including project management, client relations, personnel, and quality assurance, Catherine explained, her voice clear and firm. All department heads will report directly to her, creating a more streamlined decision-making process. Richard's face had drained of color. I wasn't aware of this reorganization, he stammered. The decision was finalized 3 weeks ago, Catherine replied evenly, on a need-to-know basis. William Harrison leaned forward. Ms. Bennett's appointment was unanimously approved by the executive committee. Her first task will be conducting a comprehensive review of all departments, identifying inefficiencies and opportunities for growth. The revelation, I finally spoke, keeping my voice professional and measured. I'm looking forward to working with all department heads to optimize our operations. I paused, making deliberate eye contact with Richard. Everyone brings value to this organization, though sometimes it requires the right position to maximize that value. Richard's eyes met mine, understanding the subtle message. His department was under my purview now. His decision to replace me would be subject to my review. The irony couldn't have been more perfect, though I took no pleasure in his obvious discomfort. This wasn't about revenge, it was about finally having the opportunity to implement the changes I'd envisioned for years. Excellent, Catherine said masterfully, moving the meeting forward. Let's proceed with the quarterly reports. Richard, I believe you're first. Richard stood on unsteady legs, fumbling with his presentation materials. The confident department head who had dismissed me days earlier was gone, replaced by a man suddenly questioning every decision that had led to this moment. I felt a twinge of empathy, remembering how I'd felt when faced with unexpected challenges in the past. Before you begin, I interjected gently, I'd like to discuss the staffing changes you proposed earlier this week. Perhaps we should revisit some of those decisions. The silence that followed was profound. Richard cleared his throat, a bead of sweat visible on his temple. Perhaps we should discuss departmental staffing after the meeting, he suggested, his voice strained. Actually, I replied, maintaining a neutral tone, since it affects the quarterly projections you're about to present, we should address it now. I turned to the board. Richard has proposed replacing our senior project manager, the position I held until today, with a recent graduate who has no industry experience. Several board members exchanged concerned glances. Catherine watched intently, giving me space to establish my authority. The West Lake project is entering its most critical phase, I continued, thinking of all the relationships I'd built with that particular client. Changing key personnel now creates unnecessary risk to both timeline and budget. William Harrison frowned. Is this accurate, Richard? The West Lake contract represents 20% of our annual revenue. Richard's presentation folder trembled slightly in his hands. I believed fresh perspectives would benefit the team, he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears, but obviously, with a new organizational structure, we can reassess. Indeed, I agreed, softening my tone. I wasn't here to humiliate him, only to correct a mistake. In fact, I've already spoken with Diana Ford about stepping into the role. Her 15 years of experience and familiarity with the Westlake specifications make her the logical choice. I didn't mention that Diana was a 47-year-old working mother who Richard had repeatedly passed over for promotion despite her exceptional performance reviews. That conversation would come later, in private. Catherine nodded approvingly. Diana is an excellent project manager. I support this decision. The look of defeat on Richard's face was unmistakable, but he managed to proceed with his quarterly report. His usually confident delivery was replaced by hesitation and frequent references to notes. When he finished, the questions from board members were pointed and occasionally critical, a stark contrast to the easy reception he typically enjoyed. As the meeting progressed through other departmental updates, I made careful notes and asked thoughtful questions that demonstrated my comprehensive understanding of the company's operations. By the time we reached new business items, the dynamic in the room had shifted palpably. Board members increasingly directed their questions to me rather than Catherine or the department heads. Near the meeting's conclusion, Catherine introduced another agenda item. As part of our restructuring, we'll be reviewing each department's age demographics and succession planning strategies. Recent data suggests our most innovative solutions have come from cross-generational collaboration. She displayed a slide showing productivity metrics across different age groups. As you can see, teams with age diversity consistently outperform homogeneous groups. I leaned forward, feeling passionate about this particular topic. If I may, I said, I'd like to share a personal perspective on this. Catherine nodded encouragingly. My late husband used to say that wisdom and innovation aren't mutually exclusive, I began, my voice steady despite the personal reference. I've seen firsthand how teams with diverse ages and backgrounds approach problems differently. The most effective solutions I've witnessed came from combining the technological savvy of our younger staff with the contextual understanding and client relationship skills of our more experienced members. Several board members nodded in agreement. What makes a company truly resilient, I continued, is its ability to value both fresh perspectives and institutional knowledge. Neither is complete without the other. My own experience as a mother raising 2 children while building a career taught me that balance is everything, in families and in business. I caught Richard's eye across the table. Experience and fresh perspectives both have value when properly integrated, I said. I look forward to working with all department heads to optimize their team compositions. The meeting adjourned at 4:30 p.m. As board members gathered their materials and engaged in post-meeting conversations, Richard approached me cautiously. Congratulations on your promotion, he said stiffly. Had I known, you'd have made different decisions, I finished for him, not unkindly. I understand completely. He nodded uncomfortably, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. About Olivia, he began. She's talented but inexperienced, I said. I think she'd benefit from our junior manager development program rather than being thrown into a senior role prematurely. Don't you agree? Richard knew he had no choice. Of course. I'll inform her of the change. No need, I replied. As COO, I should welcome all new employees personally. I'll meet with her tomorrow to discuss her actual role and set appropriate expectations. She's a single mother, you know. Our flexible scheduling options could make a real difference for her. Richard looked surprised at this information he'd clearly never bothered to learn about his new hire. I wasn't aware, getting to know our team members as people, not just resources, will be a priority under my leadership, I said, the message clear but not combative. The evening, Catherine joined us, effectively ending the conversation. Elaine, the executive team is gathering for dinner at Bayside Restaurant at 7 o'clock. We'd love for you to join us. I'd be delighted, I said, collecting my notes as Richard walked away. I watched him go, feeling strangely conflicted. There was satisfaction in this moment of professional vindication, certainly, but no real joy in seeing another person's discomfort, even someone who had treated me unfairly. Catherine watched him with a calculating expression. He'll either adapt or find himself increasingly marginalized, she observed quietly. Everyone eventually faces the consequences of their decisions. Some sooner than others, I replied. But I hope he adapts. Richard is talented in his own way. His problem is tunnel vision and bias, not lack of ability. Catherine smiled, seeming pleased with my response. That's why you're perfect for this role, Elaine. You see the whole picture, not just the convenient parts. The sun was setting over San Francisco Bay as I left the boardroom through the executive entrance, not as a visitor this time, but as someone who belonged there. The golden light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. I paused at the panoramic view, remembering how Robert and I used to watch sunsets from our favorite spot near the Golden Gate Bridge. We did it, Rob, I whispered, touching my wedding ring. Before heading to the executive dinner, I made a detour back to my old desk. I needed to retrieve my jade plant and a few personal items. The office was mostly empty now, with just a few dedicated souls still working. Marcus looked up as I approached, raising an eyebrow at my changed demeanor. Something's different, he said, studying my face. Did you win the lottery or something? I laughed softly. Something like that. You'll hear about it tomorrow at the company meeting. His eyes widened with understanding. You're not leaving at all, are you? Not exactly, I admitted. But I'll be moving to a different office. Marcus grinned broadly. I knew it. Nobody with your talent just gets shown the door without a fight. He lowered his voice. Is Richard in trouble? Richard is at a crossroads, I replied diplomatically. His future depends on his choices moving forward. I gathered my jade plant, the framed photo of my family, and a few other personal items into a small box. Before leaving, I placed a handwritten note on Olivia's desk, see me in the executive suite tomorrow at 9 a.m. There's been a change of plans. Elaine Bennett, COO. Later that evening, as I sat among the executive team at Bayside Restaurant, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and humility. The view of the bay was spectacular, the food exquisite, but what struck me most was how quickly the dynamic had adjusted. These people, most of whom had barely acknowledged me a week ago, now sought my opinions and included me in their conversations as if I'd always been one of them. William Harrison raised his glass in a toast. To Elaine Bennett and the new era at Peterson Consulting. As glasses clinked around the table, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, not just the 10 years at Peterson, but the decades of work before that, the challenges of balancing career and family, the loss of Robert, and the resilience I'd had to find within myself. None of it had been easy, but perhaps that was the point. Nothing worthwhile ever is. What's your first priority as COO? One of the executives asked. I considered the question carefully. Building bridges, I said finally. Between departments, between generations of employees, between tradition and innovation. Peterson has all the pieces for exceptional success, we just need to connect them more effectively. Catherine nodded approvingly. And that's exactly why you're sitting in that chair tonight. Friday morning's company-wide meeting brought a palpable buzz to the auditorium. Employees from every department gathered, whispering speculations about the organizational changes mentioned in Catherine's email. I stood backstage with Catherine and the executive team, dressed in a navy suit that signaled my new authority while still feeling true to myself. Nervous? Catherine asked, straightening her blazer. Surprisingly, no, I replied, fingering my husband's ring. It feels right. At exactly 9 a.m., Catherine took the stage to enthusiastic applause. I watched from the wings as she outlined Peterson Consulting's vision for the future, emphasizing innovation, collaboration, and strategic growth. To lead us through this next chapter, Catherine announced, "I'm pleased to introduce our new Chief Operations Officer, Elaine Bennett." As I walked onto the stage, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Colleagues who had worked alongside me for years stood in applause. Project managers who had seen my solutions save impossible deadlines cheered. Even the administrative staff with whom I'd always maintained respectful relationships showed their approval. Richard sat in the third row, clapping mechanically, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," I began, waiting for the applause to subside. My voice was steady, but inside I felt a surge of emotion. This moment wasn't just for me, it was for Robert, for my children, for everyone who had believed in me over the years. For 10 years, I've had the privilege of solving problems at Peterson Consulting. Today, I'm honored to help shape our collective future. I outlined my vision for operational excellence, emphasizing collaboration across generations and departments. Experience and fresh perspectives both have tremendous value, I said, making brief eye contact with Richard. Our strength lies in harnessing both. Then I shifted to a more personal tone. When my husband was diagnosed with cancer 6 years ago, I learned something important about both life and business. The only constant is change, and how we respond to that change defines us. Peterson has given me the opportunity to grow through many changes, and I'm committed to ensuring everyone in this company has the same opportunity, regardless of age, background, or circumstance. I saw several people nodding in understanding, perhaps thinking of their own life challenges. My door will always be open, I continued. Because the best solutions come from listening to different voices and perspectives. After the presentation, employees approached to offer congratulations. Marcus gave me a bear hug, whispering, "I knew you were too valuable to lose." Diana Ford's eyes shone with happy tears as she thanked me for the senior role. Olivia, looking slightly confused, waited until most had dispersed. "Ms. Bennett, Elaine," she began tentatively, shifting her weight from one foot to another. "I'm a little unclear about my position now." "New beginnings," I smiled reassuringly at Olivia, noticing the worry lines around her eyes. "Let's meet in my office in an hour. I think you have great potential, just not in the role Richard originally proposed." I lowered my voice slightly. "And I'd like to discuss some of our flexible scheduling options that might help with your son's daycare situation." Her eyes widened. "You remembered about that?" "Of course," I said, thinking of my own years juggling young children and career advancement. Some things never leave you, even decades later. Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. I'll be there." As the crowd thinned, I spotted Richard standing alone near the exit. Our eyes met briefly across the room, and after a moment's hesitation, he gave me a small nod of acknowledgement before disappearing through the doors. It wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. The transition into my role as COO happened more smoothly than anyone might have expected. By Monday morning, I had moved into the executive suite on the top floor, a spacious corner office with windows overlooking the Bay Bridge. The contrast to my former cubicle was striking, but I made sure to bring along the small jade plant that had survived 10 years of engineering crises with me. It sat on my new desk, a reminder of Robert and the day he'd told me to grow where you're planted. I'd spent the weekend reorganizing my apartment, clearing out Robert's old office to create a proper workspace for when I needed to bring work home. As I sorted through his old papers, I found a card he'd given me on my first day at Peterson. "Reach for the stars, my love," he'd written. "They may be further away than they appear, but I know you'll get there." The tears came then, not of sadness but of a peculiar bittersweet joy. He'd seen this potential in me long before I'd dared to see it in myself. My first official week was packed with meetings, getting to know each department head personally, reviewing ongoing projects, and assessing operational bottlenecks. I made a point of being visible throughout the building, visiting departments and speaking directly with employees at all levels. This wasn't just good leadership, it was a message that the barriers between executives and staff were being dismantled. I implemented my first policy change on Wednesday, a flexible scheduling option for employees with caregiving responsibilities. Whether you're caring for young children or aging parents, I explained in the company-wide email, we recognize that work-life integration is essential for both productivity and well-being. Olivia was among the first to sign up, her grateful smile worth every bit of the bureaucratic resistance I'd encountered. Richard had been notably subdued. Our first one-on-one meeting had been brief and focused strictly on his department's metrics. He avoided direct eye contact and kept his responses clipped and professional. I neither gloated nor referenced our previous dynamics, treating him with the same respectful professionalism I showed all department heads. "I'd like to see more age diversity in your team's hiring plans for next quarter," I said as our meeting concluded. "I'll revise the recruitment strategy," he replied stiffly. "Richard," I said, causing him to pause at the door. "Your expertise is valuable to Peterson. I hope you know that." Surprise flickered across his face before he nodded and left. On Friday afternoon, Catherine stopped by my office with 2 cups of coffee. "So, 1 week in, how does it feel?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching on my wedding ring, which I now wore openly on a chain around my neck. Challenging in all the right ways, I replied honestly, accepting the coffee. "There's so much opportunity for improvement." She nodded, looking pleased. "The board is impressed with your approach so far. William Harrison specifically mentioned your talent for asking the right questions." I smiled, thinking of all the questions I'd stored up over the years, waiting for the right moment to voice them. "I've had years to think about what I'd do differently if given the chance," I admitted. Catherine smiled knowingly. "That's exactly why you were the right choice. Oh, and I thought you'd want to know, Richard has requested a transfer to our Seattle office." "Running away?" I asked, raising an eyebrow, though I felt a twinge of regret. I'd hoped he might adapt. "He claims it's for family reasons," Catherine replied, "but we both know better." I considered this news thoughtfully, remembering the young Richard I'd met 10 years ago, ambitious, sharp, but already showing signs of the biases that would eventually cloud his judgment. "Let's approve it," I said finally. "Sometimes a fresh start benefits everyone. And he does have talents that could flourish in a different environment, especially with proper mentorship." Catherine raised her coffee cup in a small toast. "Spoken like a true executive." I returned the gesture, the warmth of the cup matching the warmth that spread through me. "Spoken like someone who knows the value of second chances." Later that evening, as I watered my jade plant in the golden light of sunset, my phone chimed with a text from my daughter. "Mom, just booked tickets for next weekend. Dad's anniversary. We should be together." I smiled, typing back, "Can't wait to see you both. So much to celebrate and remember." I looked out at the San Francisco skyline, the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk fell. 10 years ago, I'd arrived at Peterson as a mid-career professional with something to prove. Today, I stood at the threshold of a new chapter, carrying with me all the lessons, all the losses, all the triumphs that had shaped me. We did it, Rob, I whispered to the fading light. We really did it. The jade plant seemed to stand a little taller in response, its leaves catching the last rays of sun, growing, thriving, persevering. Just like me.